He never saw it coming. One moment, Pastor Leonard Briggs was filling his car at a quiet gas station on Riverton's east side. The next, a stranger was standing at his window. There was no shouting, no warning, just 3 sharp cracks in the night. And the man who had once been the spiritual backbone of his congregation was gone. At first, the people of Riverton were in disbelief. This was a pastor known for preaching unity, for counseling couples, for being the man you turned to when your life was falling apart. But behind that image was a story few knew, a story of trust traded for betrayal, of loyalty twisted into something dangerous. Because just 3 months before his death, Pastor Briggs had married the ex-wife of a man who considered him a brother in faith, a man who had once sat in his office, pouring out the pain of a failing marriage, believing Briggs would help him save it. That man's name was Ethan Ward. And while he didn't pull the trigger, detectives would soon suspect he might have done something far more deliberate. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about what happens when the person you trust most becomes the one you should have feared all along. Before his name was connected to any investigation, before police officers showed up at his garage with a warrant in hand, Ethan Ward was known in Riverton for something else entirely: his work ethic. He grew up in a small brick duplex on the west side of town, the second of 3 boys raised by his mother, Denise Ward. Denise worked double shifts at a nursing home to keep the lights on. Ethan's father had walked out when he was 5, leaving a stack of unpaid bills and a family that had to figure out survival on their own. Ethan learned early that no one was coming to save him. If he wanted something, he'd have to work for it. By 12, he was spending weekends at his Uncle Gerald's auto lot, watching him fix up beat-up sedans and sell them for a profit. While other kids played basketball at the park, Ethan was under a hood, learning the difference between a carburetor and a fuel pump. At 16, he was fixing neighbors' cars for pocket money: brake pads, oil changes, tune-ups. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him a sense of control over his life. After high school, college wasn't in the cards. Money was tight. Instead, Ethan enrolled in a local vocational program for auto body repair. Days were spent in class. Evenings, working part-time at a tire shop, stacking tires taller than himself, inhaling the sharp tang of rubber and motor oil. He earned a reputation for being meticulous, never rushing a job, always double-checking his work. By 2012, at just 27, Ethan had saved enough to lease a small 2-bay garage on the south end of Riverton. Ward's custom auto and body wasn't flashy. There were no waiting room lattes, no flat-screen TVs, just solid work, honest pricing, and a man who stood behind every job he did. People liked him. They trusted him, and he trusted them back. Those who knew Ethan back then remember a man who kept his circle small. A few close friends, a loyal group of customers, and his family. Relationships? They happened, but they were short-lived. He wanted a family one day, but only with the right person. In 2013, he thought he'd found her. It was the summer of 2013, Riverton's annual charity car show. A warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the smell of barbecue mingled with the hum of restored engines. Ethan had just finished polishing the hood of a customer's cherry red '69 Camaro when he heard laughter behind him. Light, quick, impossible to ignore. He turned. That's when he saw her. Sierra Lane. She wasn't there for the cars. At least, that's what she told him later. She was there helping a friend sell tickets for the charity raffle. But she carried herself like someone who belonged anywhere she stood. Confident posture, easy smile, eyes that didn't dart away when they met yours. Sierra was born in Cleveland in 1989, raised in a working-class neighborhood by parents who believed in hard work and presentation. She'd started her career as a receptionist in a small interior design firm, but by 24, she'd already worked her way up to junior designer. Where Ethan was quiet and methodical, Sierra was quick and social. She made conversation with ease, the kind of person who could turn a stranger into a friend before the end of the line at the coffee shop. Their first conversation was short, a comment about the weather, a joke about how much work goes into making an old car shine. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, Sierra showed up at Ward's custom auto with her own car, a silver Honda Accord that needed an oil change. Ethan suspected she could have gone anywhere, but she chose his shop. That visit turned into coffee. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends spent together. Within months, their lives began to overlap in ways that felt natural. She'd bring him lunch at the shop. He'd pick her up after late meetings. On Sundays, she'd sit with him and his mother at New Hope Baptist Church, listening as Pastor Leonard Briggs preached from the pulpit. By early 2014, Ethan's friends noticed something different in him. The guarded man they knew now smiled easier, talked more about the future, and mentioned Sierra in almost every conversation. That spring, Ethan proposed to her in the place he knew best, his garage. He'd cleared out one of the bays, set up string lights, and placed a modest diamond ring on the workbench. She said yes without hesitation. In September 2014, they stood side by side at the altar of New Hope Baptist, with Pastor Briggs leading them through vows they believed would last forever. For a while, it looked like they would. For the first few years, married life was steady. They bought a modest 2-bedroom home on the north side of Riverton. Weeknights meant home-cooked meals. Weekends were road trips to nearby towns or evenings on the couch watching movies. But by 2022, the balance that once kept their marriage comfortable began to tilt. Sierra's career in interior design had exploded. She'd gone from styling modest living rooms for local clients to landing contracts with corporate offices and boutique hotels. Her work started showing up in design magazines. Her Instagram following grew. With success came travel, business trips to Chicago, New York, Atlanta, long nights at networking events, weekend project launches. Ethan was proud of her, but his own business was facing the opposite trajectory. Ward's Custom Auto had been steady for nearly a decade, but a new national auto body chain had opened just 3 miles away, offering discounts he couldn't match. Longtime customers were drifting away. His days were slower now. Some afternoons he'd stand in the middle of the garage with the tools cleaned and the bays empty, the sound of the clock on the wall louder than any engine. At home, the change was harder to ignore. The little rituals that had once anchored them, Thursday takeout nights, Sunday drives, evening walks, were disappearing. When Sierra was home, her mind often wasn't. She'd be scrolling through emails while Ethan talked, answering texts during dinner. He told himself it was temporary, just a busy season. But when weeks turned into months, the space between them started to feel permanent. Sierra saw it differently. She believed Ethan was pulling away because he felt threatened by her success. She tried to reassure him, but every attempt to close the gap only seemed to make it wider. They were still in the same house, still sharing the same bed, but they were no longer living the same life. And it was in that growing silence that Ethan made a decision. One he thought would fix everything. By late 2022, the arguments were no longer rare. They weren't shouting matches, not yet, but they carried that sharp edge that makes every word feel heavier than it should. Sierra suggested marriage counseling. Not with family, not with friends, with someone neutral, a licensed professional. But Ethan had someone else in mind. For more than a decade, Pastor Leonard Briggs had been more than just his preacher. He was the man who baptized him at 22, who prayed with him before he signed the lease on his first garage, who stood at the altar on his wedding day. Ethan trusted Briggs in a way he trusted very few people. If anyone could help fix this, it would be him. Sierra hesitated. She reminded Ethan that Briggs wasn't a trained therapist, that pastoral counseling often meant mixing personal opinions with scripture. But Ethan framed it differently. Not just as counseling, but as a step toward unity, proof that they could work through their problems without strangers who didn't share their faith. Eventually, she agreed. When they walked into Briggs's office at New Hope Baptist, the air was warm with the scent of polished wood and old books. A large cross hung behind the desk. Rows of Bibles and religious texts lined the shelves. Briggs greeted them with a broad smile, shaking Ethan's hand firmly, then holding Sierra's a second longer than most would notice. After a few minutes of small talk, Briggs suggested something unexpected, separate sessions first. He said it would help him hear each of their hearts without interruption. Ethan agreed immediately. Sierra kept her thoughts to herself. What happened next would set the stage for everything that followed. In Ethan's private sessions, Briggs spoke with the tone of a protective father, but his words carried weight that would leave lasting marks. He talked about spiritual alignment and what it meant to be equally yoked in God's plan. Then he asked Ethan if Sierra's career, her travel, her late nights, was pulling him away from his purpose. He didn't give Ethan an answer. He made Ethan say it himself. In Sierra's sessions, Briggs leaned forward, listening like every word was a treasure. He told her she was a woman of favor, blessed with a calling, and that her success was something to be celebrated, not dimmed. He suggested Ethan might be insecure about her achievements. He sent her short text messages between sessions. Stay encouraged. Keep shining. Don't lose that smile. To both of them, Briggs appeared supportive. But he wasn't pulling them closer together. He was planting seeds to push them apart. March 3rd, 2023. 8 years since Ethan and Sierra stood at the altar. Ethan had been thinking about the date for weeks. He closed the shop early, pressed his best shirt, and made a reservation at Davenport's, the quiet little restaurant tucked away on Riverton's west side, where they'd celebrated their first anniversary. He even asked for the same corner table, the one by the window, the one where the light was soft and the world outside seemed to slow down. He arrived early, the hostess greeting him by name. He sat, ordered water, and rehearsed in his mind what he might say. Maybe they could talk about the early years, the things they'd lost, and could still find again. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. He sent her a text. Here at the table. Drive safe. No reply. An hour later, the warmth he'd felt earlier in the day was gone, replaced by a dull heaviness in his chest. When he finally checked his phone again, it wasn't a message from Sierra that lit the screen. It was a notification from a mutual friend's social media page. A local event gallery had just posted photos from that night's Riverton Design Society gala. And there she was, Sierra, in a black evening gown, champagne in hand, laughing with a cluster of city officials and corporate sponsors. The caption praised her as the creative mind behind the event's design. When she walked in close to midnight, still in that gown, Ethan asked where she'd been. She said it was work, a commitment she couldn't miss. He reminded her what day it was. She reminded him that her career didn't stop for personal dates. The words that followed were fast, sharp, and cold. Accusations about neglect, resentment, sacrifices no longer acknowledged. And in that moment, something in Ethan shifted. The next morning, before Sierra was even awake, he called his attorney. Within hours, the paperwork was in motion. March 3rd, 2023 would no longer be remembered as their anniversary. For Ethan, it was the day he decided their marriage was over. Once Ethan made the call, things moved quickly. There were no long talks about reconciliation, no counseling sessions to patch the cracks. The decision was final before the first set of papers was even printed. His attorney filed for divorce on March 6, 2023. 3 days later, a process server walked into Sierra's design studio and handed her a manila envelope in front of her staff. Inside were the words that would end their marriage. No allegations of cheating, no dramatic claims, just irreconcilable differences typed neatly on the first page. Sierra wasn't surprised, but she was furious at how abruptly it was done. She told friends it felt like Ethan had been planning it for weeks. From that point forward, every conversation between them became businesslike. Who would keep the house? How the joint accounts would be closed? What to do about the furniture they'd bought together? Ethan wanted the house sold. Sierra refused. In the end, she agreed to buy out his share, taking on a new loan to make it happen. The final court date came in October 2023. Ethan arrived early, wearing a navy shirt and pressed slacks. He didn't look around the courtroom when Sierra entered in a tailored pantsuit, her hair pinned neatly back. They didn't speak. The judge moved through the terms in under 20 minutes. When the gavel fell, it was over. Ethan walked out without glancing behind him. Sierra sat for a moment longer, gathering her bag before leaving through a different door. From that day forward, they lived like two people in separate cities, even though they were only miles apart. No calls, no texts, no accidental run-ins. It was as though they'd drawn an invisible map of Riverton, each avoiding the other's side. Neither of them knew it yet, but in just 3 months, their names would be linked again. Not in a courtroom for divorce, but in a murder investigation. January 2024. It had been just over 3 months since the divorce. Ethan was back to long hours at the shop, keeping his head down and avoiding talk about Sierra altogether. That's when his phone rang. It was Marcus Hill, a man they both knew from New Hope Baptist. Someone Ethan hadn't spoken to in months. Marcus's tone was cautious, like he was about to say something he'd rather not. "I thought you should hear this from me," he began. Then came the words that landed like a blow. "Briggs is engaged, and it's Sierra." For a moment, Ethan didn't answer. The hum of the shop's space heater was the only sound. Marcus continued, saying invitations were already being prepared, the date set for mid-March. Ethan didn't ask if it was true. He didn't have to. 2 days later, he drove to the church and parked at the far end of the lot. He waited until the Sunday service let out. When Briggs stepped outside, Bible tucked under one arm, shaking hands with church members, Ethan walked toward him. "Tell me it's not true," he said. Briggs didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "It's true," he replied, almost casually. Then, with a faint smile, he added, "You don't know what you had until you lose it." Ethan's voice rose. "You made me divorce her." Briggs didn't blink. "I only advised you. I never forced you," he said, his tone calm, almost dismissive. And then, as if to drive the point deeper, Briggs leaned in slightly and said, "The wedding's in a few weeks. You should come." Ethan stood frozen, jaw tight, heartbeat pounding in his ears. The man in front of him wasn't acting like someone who had crossed a moral line. He was acting like someone proud of it. When Ethan finally turned and walked away, the image of Briggs standing there, unshaken, burned into his mind. He would later tell a friend, "That was the day I stopped thinking about the past and started thinking about what was next." In the weeks after that confrontation outside the church, Ethan's behavior changed. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't reckless. It was quiet and deliberate. Customers noticed he seemed distracted. Friends said he was harder to reach, his calls shorter, his texts slower. On January 28, 2024, Ethan opened something he'd never shown interest in before, a cryptocurrency wallet. To anyone else, it looked harmless. But the transfers that followed were precise. 3 separate deposits totaling $24,000, spread over 10 days, just small enough to avoid raising bank alerts. Around that time, he began making appearances in places he hadn't visited in years. A bar on the north side, a late-night diner near the interstate, a pool hall that opened until 3 a.m. To anyone watching, it looked like he was just getting out more. But to investigators later, it would look like something else. A man making sure there would be witnesses who could swear where he was at certain times. Then came the meeting. February 7th, 2024, 9:42 p.m. A rundown motel off Highway 44. Ethan's truck pulled into the far corner of the lot, away from the streetlights. Minutes later, a gray sedan arrived. A woman stepped out, hood up, hands in her pockets. They spoke for less than 5 minutes. She got back into her car. He sat in his truck for a long moment before driving off. That woman was Kara Jennings, 32 years old, a bartender from Indianapolis with no criminal record, at least, not yet. By late February, Ethan's patterns were set. Appear in public at certain times and places. Make contact with Kara in locations with no cameras. Move small amounts of cash in and out of his accounts. And through it all, he kept his business running just enough to avoid suspicion. Looking back, detectives would say this wasn't rage in the heat of the moment. It was controlled. It was planned. And it was only waiting for the right night. March 14th, 2024. 2 days before Pastor Leonard Briggs's wedding. He spent the afternoon at the church office, finalizing details for the ceremony. Staff later recalled he was in high spirits, smiling as he left around 6:45 p.m. At 7:12, his white sedan pulled into the Quick Mart gas station on the east side of Riverton. The security footage from that night would later become a central piece of evidence. It shows Briggs stepping out, still in his white dress shirt and dark slacks. The Bible he always carried resting on the passenger seat. He selects pump number 4, swipes his card, and starts filling the tank. From the far edge of the lot, a figure enters the frame. Small build, hoodie pulled tight, baseball cap low. They don't hurry. They don't hide. They walk straight toward the driver's side window. The figure gestures with one hand, a motion suggesting, roll it down. Briggs does. At 7:18 p.m., 3 sharp flashes erupt inside the frame. 1 to the chest, 2 to the head. The figure turns, walks back the way they came, and disappears behind the convenience store into a blind corner where no cameras face. Witnesses describe the shooter as calm. No running, no shouting, no panic. Briggs's car rolls forward a few feet before stopping against a low curb. His right hand is still gripping the wheel when the first patrol car arrives 3 minutes later. Nothing is taken. His wallet is still in his jacket pocket. His phone is on the seat. Whatever this was, it wasn't a robbery. It was a message. Detectives from Riverton PD arrived at the Quick Mart within minutes of the first 911 call. Yellow tape went up, and the parking lot became a crime scene. From the start, the shooting didn't look random. 3 shots, all fired at close range. No sign of robbery. The shooter walked away without urgency. Investigators pulled the security footage from the gas station, but they didn't stop there. They canvassed every business along that stretch of road, collecting hours of video from convenience stores, auto shops, and even a laundromat 2 blocks over. A pattern emerged. The same figure, small frame, same hoodie, same baseball cap, had been spotted shadowing Briggs in the days before the murder, standing at the edge of a lot while he fueled his car, leaning against a wall across from his barber shop, stepping into a grocery store just moments after he walked out. But the footage wasn't clear enough for facial ID. The break came from a witness, a man at the air pump the night of the shooting. He told police he saw the shooter get into a dark sedan parked out of camera range, then drive off without headlights. That tip triggered a deeper search. Traffic cameras on a nearby intersection caught a dark gray sedan heading toward the highway less than 2 minutes after the shooting. Detectives ran the plates. They came back to a rental car out of Indianapolis. When they pulled the rental records, one name stood out: Kara Jennings. No criminal record, no known connection to Briggs. But phone records placed her in Riverton the day before the shooting, and in the same area as Briggs multiple times in the past month. 3 weeks later, on March 30th, Border Patrol agents at a Texas checkpoint stopped a white sedan for inspection. The driver's license read Kara Jennings. She was calm, cooperative. She didn't deny being in Riverton. But when detectives from Ohio flew in to question her, the story changed. 6 hours into interrogation, she leaned forward and said, "I didn't know him. I was hired." The payment? $24,000 in cryptocurrency. 3 transfers over 10 days. Forensics teams traced the blockchain trail, bouncing through encrypted wallets, until they found one slip, a login without a VPN. The IP address led straight to Ethan Ward's shop. By the time the case reached trial in February 2025, the courtroom in Riverton County was standing room only. Reporters filled the back rows. Briggs's former congregation members sat shoulder to shoulder in silence. The prosecution's opening was direct. This was not a crime of impulse. This was a crime of planning, of patience, and of revenge. They began with motive. They told the jury how Ethan Ward had trusted Pastor Leonard Briggs to counsel his marriage. How Briggs later married Ethan's ex-wife just 3 months after the divorce. How that betrayal was public, whispered about in pews, talked about at barbershops, even mentioned in the local paper. Then they moved to method. Crypto trail. Blockchain analysts explained how Ethan opened a wallet in late January 2024. How $24,000 in privacy coins moved from that wallet to an account later linked to Kara Jennings. The meeting. Surveillance stills from the Highway 44 motel parking lot showed Ethan and Kara standing close, speaking briefly before going separate ways. The tale. Multiple clips showed Kara's rental car parked near Briggs's usual stops in the days leading up to the murder. The prosecutors layered it all in chronological order, building the sense that every step had been rehearsed. When they played the Quick Mart security footage, the room was so silent the hum of the projector was the loudest sound. The defense countered with a different picture. They described Ethan as a man pushed to the edge by humiliation and heartbreak. They claimed Kara misunderstood what Ethan wanted, that he never asked for a killing, only for someone to send a message. But the prosecution had one final blow. Phone records showing Ethan's number pinging towers near Kara's location in Indianapolis before each transfer of cryptocurrency. After 3 days of testimony, the jury retired at 9:20 a.m. on February 19, 2025. They returned just before 7 p.m. that night. Verdict: Ethan Ward, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Kara Jennings, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The judge didn't delay sentencing. Both were given life without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Sierra Lane was nowhere in sight. She had not attended the trial. She had not given a statement. She had not spoken publicly about Briggs since the day of his death. Within a week, her house was empty. Neighbors saw a moving truck pull up early one morning. By noon, she was gone. No forwarding address, no trail to follow. Former members of New Hope Baptist tried to carry on, but the damage was done. Attendance plummeted. Donations dried up. The image of their pastor, once a trusted voice in the community, was now forever linked to scandal, betrayal, and a violent end. By the end of the year, the church doors were locked for good. The sign out front still read Sunday service, 10:30 a.m., but the parking lot was overgrown with weeds. In Riverton, the case left scars. People argued about it in diners and barbershops, not just about guilt and innocence, but about trust, loyalty, and how well we ever really know the people we let into our lives. For Denise Ward, Ethan's mother, the pain was layered. She had lost her son, not to death, but to a life behind bars. For Briggs's family, the loss was final. No verdict could bring him back. And for Sierra, she vanished into silence, carrying the weight of being the connection between two men, one her husband, the other her pastor, who would never see the outside of a prison or a grave again. Trust. It's a word we use without thinking, until it's broken. Ethan Ward trusted his pastor to protect his marriage. Sierra trusted her husband to fight for their life together. An entire congregation trusted Leonard Briggs to live by the words he preached. And in the end, all of them paid a price. One man lost his freedom. One man lost his life. One woman lost everything she thought she was walking toward. The people of Riverton still ask the same questions today. Was the betrayal worth the cost? Could it have been stopped before it reached the point of no return? And the one that cuts the deepest. If the person you trusted most took the one thing you couldn't replace, what would you do? This story isn't just about a marriage that failed or a pastor who crossed a line. It's about the dangerous space where love, pride, and vengeance meet. If you believe betrayal can destroy more than a life, share this story. If you think trust should never be used as a weapon, subscribe now. Because the next time a case like this unfolds, you might be the only one who sees the warning signs before it's too late.